In the heart of a raging New York blizzard, where the world outside dissolved into a furious white void, a man signed away his marriage with a cruel grin, unaware that the woman across the table held the keys to an empire that could crush him. As the ink dried, the storm whispered secrets of betrayal, inheritance, and a revenge forged in silence. But was it revenge? Or the cold hand of justice finally closing in? The conference room on the 60th floor felt like a glass cage suspended in the sky, battered relentlessly by the howling winds of the blizzard. Snowflakes hurled themselves against the panoramic windows, turning the iconic New York skyline into a hazy, ghostly smear, as if the city itself was being erased. Inside, the air was thick with a silence that pressed down like an invisible weight, broken only by the sharp scratch of Dominic Sterling's gold-nibbed fountain pen against the divorce papers. He signed with a smirk that twisted his handsome features into something predatory, his dark eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a victor shedding an unwanted burden. 7 years of marriage dissolved in a flourish of ink. He didn't even glance at me, Serena, as he pushed the documents across the gleaming mahogany table. His platinum chronometer, an ostentatious piece that screamed excess, costing more than my first modest car, ticked impatiently on his wrist. He checked it with a casual flick, then reached for his phone, his thumbs dancing over the screen. I knew exactly who he was texting. Bianca, his sleek, ambitious mistress, no doubt finalizing details for their indulgent getaway to Aspen. The thought sent a flicker of something cold through my veins. Not jealousy exactly, but a quiet, simmering resolve. "There," Dominic said at last, his voice smooth and detached, like a businessman closing a minor deal. He still avoided my eyes, treating me as if I were invisible, a relic from a chapter he'd long since outgrown. "It's done. You have 30 days to vacate the penthouse, Serena. I'm listing it next month. The market's scorching hot, and I won't let it gather dust." He rose fluidly, adjusting his silk tie with the precision of a man who believed the world revolved around his schedule. When he finally deigned to look at me, it was with the pitying gaze one might give to outdated furniture headed for a dusty warehouse. "Try something smaller," he added, his tone laced with mock sympathy that dripped like venom. "A studio near the museum, perhaps. It suits your quaint, dusty existence so much better." The words hung in the air, designed to wound, to diminish. Inside, I felt a storm of my own brewing, not the explosive kind, but a calculated whirlwind, building pressure slowly, inexorably. He reached for his cashmere coat, already mentally en route to the private airfield where his jet awaited, engines humming in anticipation. In his mind, he was the hero of this tale, the dynamic vice president of development at Obsidian Capital Partners, finally cutting loose the unambitious, boring wife who had held him back. He saw himself as liberated, soaring toward new heights, while I was the dead weight plummeting into obscurity. Oh, how wrong he was. He had no inkling that he was teetering on the edge of a trap door I had constructed long before our paths ever crossed. A mechanism of justice, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to spring. But then, the judge's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Keats commanded. She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Her tone carried the unyielding authority of someone who had presided over the rise and fall of fortunes, empires crumbling under the weight of their own hubris. A no-nonsense woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had no tolerance for men who strutted like deities in her courtroom. Dominic froze mid-motion, his coat half draped over his arm. A faint frown creased his perfectly groomed forehead, annoyance flashing in his eyes. "I have a flight to catch, Judge," he replied, his voice edged with impatience. "The divorce is signed. We're finished here." "The divorce is signed," Judge Keats corrected coolly, her finger sliding a thick, cream-colored envelope onto the table. It sat there like a loaded weapon, its red wax seal gleaming ominously under the fluorescent lights. "But the division of assets demands full disclosure of any significant financial changes. And as of 72 hours ago, your wife's financial situation has evolved." Dominic let out a bark of laughter, short and scornful, shaking his head as if this were some trivial joke. "Did your mother leave you her prized collection of antique thimbles, Serena?" he sneered, finally addressing me directly, though his gaze was laced with contempt. "Or perhaps that rundown brownstone in Brooklyn? Keep it all. I want nothing from your side of the family. I just want out." He checked his phone again, scrolling dismissively, as if the matter was beneath him. I remained silent, my hands folded in my lap, watching him with a detachment that masked the torrent of thoughts swirling in my mind. He was dismissing me, my family, my entire history, the very foundation that had enabled his climb to power. He had no idea how deeply those roots ran, how they entwined with the world he thought he owned. The judge's fingers broke the wax seal with a crisp snap, echoing like a fracture in the brittle quiet of the room. She scanned the document, her expression unchanging. "This is the testamentary trust execution for the estate of the late Victoria Vance," she read aloud. "As the sole surviving heir, full control of the Vance family trust has been transferred to Serena Vance." Dominic rolled his eyes dramatically, his impatience boiling over. "Congratulations, Serena. Enjoy your little trust fund. Can I go now?" But the judge's voice deepened, taking on a grave timbre that made the air feel heavier. "The trust holds a controlling interest in a diversified portfolio of global assets, valued at approximately $180 billion. The number landed like a thunderclap. Dominic's thumb halted over his phone screen, frozen in mid-swipe. The room seemed to shift on its axis, the blizzard outside intensifying, as if mirroring the chaos about to unfold. $180 billion? He whispered, the words tasting alien on his tongue, his composure cracking for the first time. "That's impossible. That's sovereign wealth fund territory." The judge continued relentlessly, her eyes flicking over the page. "The portfolio includes the Vantage Group, Highland Logistics, and a controlling majority share in Obsidian Capital Partners." Color drained from Dominic's face in an instant, like blood fleeing a wound. It was almost magical, watching the arrogance leach away, leaving him pallid and exposed. Obsidian Capital Partners wasn't just any firm. It was the conglomerate that employed him, signed his lavish paychecks, and owned the very skyscraper we occupied. This building, this room, was now mine. "That's a mistake," he stammered, his voice fracturing, the once unshakable confidence splintering like ice under pressure. "Obsidian is owned by a blind trust. The board's run by a proxy, a woman named V. Moore." "Vance," I said softly, breaking my silence at last. It was the first words I'd spoken since he entered, calm and measured, devoid of the fury he anticipated. I leaned forward ever so slightly, meeting his gaze. Serena Vance. V. Moore was merely the alias on the login credentials. He stared at me, eyes widening in disbelief, searching my face for traces of the meek, compliant wife he believed he knew. But that version of me had been a carefully crafted facade, a veil now lifting to reveal the truth. Internally, a quiet thrill coursed through me, not vindictive glee, but the satisfaction of a long-held strategy unfolding perfectly. "You hated V. Moore," I continued, my tone even, almost conversational. "I read your internal memos, Dominic. You called her a dinosaur, a blind relic obstructing your progress because she wouldn't greenlight your reckless zoning shortcuts. For 2 years, you've been insulting your boss to her face, without ever realizing it was me." "You," he rasped, gripping the table's edge as if to steady himself against the vertigo of revelation. His knuckles whitened, the smirk long gone. "You were on the board?" "I was the board," I corrected, my words hanging like a noose tightening slowly. "You mistook my silence for weakness, Dominic. But in a panopticon, the watcher stays quiet to observe the prisoner's true colors. I wasn't idly lingering in the background at those gala dinners. I was evaluating you. And you failed spectacularly. Every single time." The silence that descended wasn't mere quiet. It was oppressive, laden with the weight of unspoken realizations, like the stifling air in a sealed vault just before the lock engages. Dominic sat there, mouth agape, gazing at me as though I were a phantom he'd overlooked 1,000 times. He was desperately trying to piece together the puzzle, the unassuming woman who folded his laundry juxtaposed with the iron-willed chairwoman who had thwarted his most audacious schemes over the past 2 years. Wave after wave of understanding crashed over him, not remorse, but frantic recalculation, rewinding our shared history for missed signs. But he wouldn't find them. He had never bothered to look beyond his own reflection. People like Dominic assume that service stems from inferiority, that quietude equals powerlessness. He ridiculed my days spent in dimly lit archives, preserving historical artifacts, calling my passion for structural preservation quaint and tedious. To him, architecture was all surface, gleaming glass towers, soaring heights, superficial shine. He built his career on precarious edges, what experts term the glass cliff. Thriving in volatility, wagering on high-stakes gambles that dazzled when successful, but devastated when they faltered. And each time he wobbled on that precipice, a deal teetering due to his overinflated ego, he chalked his salvation up to fortune. But it wasn't luck. It was me, the unseen guardian, monitoring the ladder he ascended so recklessly. For instance, when he pushed the Hudson Yards expansion, I was the shadowy vote mandating an environmental review, averting $1 billion litigation disaster months later. When he schemed to raid the pension fund for bloated quarterly dividends, I was the one vetoing it in the dead of night as he slumbered obliviously beside me. I had inverted our roles entirely. He fancied himself the visionary builder, me the ornamental spouse. In truth, he was the volatile risk, and I, the unyielding foundation holding it all together. I hadn't concealed my identity to ensnare him deliberately. My mother, Victoria, had instilled in me that wealth warps perceptions, transforms affection into bargaining chips, devotion into calculated plays. I needed to discern if he cherished Serena the archivist or would only value Serena the heiress. He answered unequivocally the day he skipped her funeral for a mundane ribbon cutting at a New Jersey strip mall, dismissing it as just business. Now, in this frigid boardroom, I faced the man who had viewed my existence as a hindrance to his ascent. He believed he was crafting our destiny. Little did he know, he'd just delivered the demolition plans straight into my hands. Dominic offered no apology. Men of his ilk don't grasp humiliation. They only register eroded advantage. With hands that now trembled faintly, he buttoned his coat and exited the mediation room wordlessly. The door latched with a soft click, and the blizzard beyond seemed to engulf him, a fitting prelude to the tempest ahead. But this wasn't the end. It was merely a shift in arenas. 10 minutes later, ensconced in the leather cocoon of my town car's back seat, I watched the city succumb to the freeze. My phone vibrated, alert from MarketWatch, the cutthroat financial gossip site Dominic devoured like gospel. The headline assaulted my screen. Unstable heiress jeopardizes market stability. Is Obsidian Capital's new owner in meltdown mode? I tapped to read. Anonymous sources painted a damning picture of erratic, emotion-driven leadership, a scorned wife weaponizing the firm for personal vendetta. It skirted naming Dominic, but mirrored his plight impeccably, casting him as a victim of nepotistic purge, a stellar exec ousted by hysteria. Then, a text bubbled up from him. You might own the building, Serena, but I own the narrative. The board despises chaos. If the stock tanks 10 points by dawn, they'll oust you before you swipe your keycard. Settle now. Give me the package, or I raze your mother's legacy. Staring at the words, no betrayal stung me. No tears welled. Only a crystalline, detached lucidity remained. He was validating every suspicion. The company was mere collateral to him, a hostage in his game. He saw this as chess, bluffing me into capitulation by targeting my family's honor. But he'd erred gravely. You don't menace a historian with history. We excel at excavation. I ignored his message, foregoing rebuttals or denials. Instead, I flipped open my laptop, accessing Obsidian's fortified server. One email sufficed, to IT's chief. Subject: Level 5 Forensic Audit Authorization. Body: Isolate servers. Mirror VP of Development's drives. External team access immediate. He craved a verbal skirmish. I'd deliver a data onslaught. Walking into Obsidian Capital Partners headquarters typically meant anonymity for me. Signing in as a visitor, perching unnoticed on a sofa while Dominic wrapped calls. Today, the marble lobby thrummed with a bunker-like tension. Conversations hushed as I passed, gazes averted, phones pocketed. The security guard, ignored by Dominic for years, nodded respectfully, holding the elevator. He knew. They all knew. The dull wife now controlled the payroll. I bypassed Dominic's office, heading straight to the executive suite. I summoned Bianca. She appeared 5 minutes later, pale as the snow outside, clutching her bag like armor. At 26, she was a crisis-spinning prodigy, now dreading career annihilation before noon. She braced for histrionics, the jilted wife's tirade about affairs, aspen trysts, deceitful whispers. I didn't invite her to sit. Standing by the window, I gazed at the burying blizzard. "I'm not concerned with your personal entanglements, Bianca," I said, back turned. "The messages, the escapes, the fabrications, those are sentimental arrears I've already absolved." Turning, I noted her bewilderment at my composure. "My focus is the company," I pressed. "Dominic's misusing resources for a defamation assault on the primary shareholder. That's malfeasance. If complicit, you're culpable. If coerced, you're a key witness." She swallowed, recognizing fidelity to a doomed vessel meant shared submersion. "He ordered the article's release," she murmured. "Said painting you unstable would spook the board. He had me prep tomorrow's statement, gave me files." "Hand them over," I demanded, palm outstretched. After a beat, she extracted a silver flash drive from her bag. "It's all here," she quavered. "Drafts, contacts, emails. He insisted on backups if locked out. Called it leverage." She believed she was surrendering PR ammo for leniency. Unwittingly, she delivered Armageddon. I pocketed the drive, its chill weight portentous. "You're dismissed, Bianca. HR will discuss your exit package." She bolted. Alone, I contemplated the device. Dominic's hubris paired with indolence, he loathed juggling drives. If he'd tasked her with safeguarding leverage, it encompassed far more than press kits. Everything he feared losing. The forensic audit unfolded not in opulent boardrooms, but in the subterranean server chamber, a humming sanctum of fans and data streams, sterile, frigid, ruthlessly truthful. Numbers don't deceive, they bide time for apt inquiries. Beside me sat Kieran, the forensic accountant I'd engaged hastily, viewing ledgers like masterpieces. The drive interfaced with an isolated terminal. "We located the PR docs," he said, screen's azure hue casting shadows on his face. "Vicious material. But that's secondary." "What's primary?" I probed, leaning in. "This isn't mere campaign backup," Kieran elaborated, commands unveiling data torrents. "Sterling dumped his full profile pre-departure yesterday. Copied his entire documents folder, likely without scrutinizing subfolders. He navigated to Riverside Internal. Cross-checked his reports against this. Last 12 quarters, he claims 98% Midwest occupancy, maxing bonuses. He highlighted crimson columns. But bank records align with 82%, a 16% discrepancy. That's $4.8 million vanished." "Phantom leasing," I murmured, ice settling in my core. "Faking occupancy to meet goals, shuffling maintenance funds to mask shortfalls." "Precisely," Kieran affirmed. "Pillaging upkeep budgets for personal gain, asset stripping for board illusions." Gazing at the display, this transcended oversight or shrewdness. It was outright fraud, a felony. Dominic viewed this as matrimonial haggling. He'd unwittingly escalated to criminal terrain, activating a snare I hadn't anticipated. "Print everything," I instructed, rising, "and retrieve the 2021 executive contract template, the one Dominic mandated." Kieran puzzled, but I offered a smile. Not warm, but the grin of unearthing archival dynamite. "There's a provision," I whispered. "The Sterling Clause. His own invention to oust a competitor. It decrees any exec falsifying data forfeits severance and stocks." Dominic sought to torch my heritage. Instead, he'd self-immolated his escape hatch. The boardroom doors hissed open with a pneumatic sigh, admitting Dominic like a man marching to claim victory. Flanked by his lawyer, a sleek, expensive suit with a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's annual salary, he strode in as if this were his coronation rather than an audit. He slammed the briefcase onto the mahogany table, the same polished surface where my mother had once inked the company's founding documents 40 years earlier. The thud echoed like a declaration of war. "Let's keep this efficient," Dominic announced, not bothering to sit. His eyes locked on me alone, ignoring the board members arrayed along the walls like silent witnesses. "My team has the separation agreement ready. 6 million severance, full immediate vesting of options, non-disparagement clause binding the company. Sign it, and that little market watch piece about your instability vanishes quietly. Refuse, and tomorrow I sit down with the Wall Street Journal for an exclusive. Sink or swim, Serena. Isn't that what I always told you?" His voice carried the smug confidence of someone who believed leverage still rested firmly in his hands. Internally, I felt nothing. No rage, no tremor of doubt. Only the calm certainty of a trap long set, now closing. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I pressed a single button on the console before me. The overhead lights dimmed gradually, plunging the room into theatrical shadow. A massive screen behind me flickered to life with a low electronic hum. It wasn't a contract. It was data. Raw, unforgiving spreadsheets from the Midwest commercial portfolio. Occupancy logs, revenue deposits, maintenance reallocations. Numbers laid bare under cold blue light. "Sit down, Dominic," I said quietly. In the sudden gloom, my voice seemed to fill every corner, the only sound besides the faint whir of the projector. He frowned, squinting at the glowing figures. "What the hell is this? This is internal." "Column C," I interrupted, aiming the laser pointer at the crimson highlighted rows. "Reported occupancy 98%. Actual revenue deposits 82%. For 12 consecutive quarters, you've fabricated figures to trigger maximum performance bonuses. That's a $4.8 million shortfall you've concealed by diverting maintenance budgets." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Dominic's lawyer slowly closed his leather folder and took a subtle step backward, distancing himself physically from the fallout. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Whispers rustled like dry leaves. "That's a clerical error," Dominic stammered, his face flushing in ugly blotches. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the room's chill. "Creative accounting. Everyone in the industry bends the numbers a little to hit targets. You can't seriously—" "Actually," I said, sliding a single photocopied sheet across the table toward him, "I can. And I don't even have to pay you to walk away." He stared down at the document as though it might bite. It was his own employment contract amendment from 3 years prior, the one he'd insisted the board adopt after using it to eliminate a rival. His signature stared back at him from the bottom, bold and unmistakable. "Do you remember this?" I asked softly. "You called it the Zero Tolerance Initiative. You drafted it yourself, to fire Marcus when he got too close to your promotion. You pushed hard for the board to include a specific clause for all executive officers." I read it aloud, each word measured, deliberate, never breaking eye contact. Any executive officer found to have knowingly manipulated financial data to influence compensation shall forfeit all rights to severance, deferred compensation, and unvested stock options. Termination shall be immediate and for cause. The room seemed to shrink around him. Dominic's breathing grew shallow, ragged. He looked from the paper to his own trembling hands, then back to me. The man who had once terrorized corridors with barked orders, who had dismissed me as dead weight, now appeared diminished, smaller, almost fragile. The legal team refers to it as the Sterling Clause, I continued, my voice still calm, almost gentle. You built the trap, Dominic. You sharpened every spike. And now it's sprung. The arrogance didn't fade gradually. It collapsed entirely, like a building whose supports had been dynamited. No anger remained, only structural failure. He opened his mouth, but no defense emerged. He glanced toward the door, then at his lawyer, who now refused to meet his eyes, then back to me. The $6 million golden parachute he'd counted on, the condo upgrades, the Aspen chalets, the lifestyle he considered his birthright, evaporated before him. He wasn't merely being dismissed. He was being erased. Security, I said into the intercom, tone flat and final. Please escort Mr. Sterling to the lobby. He has no personal effects to collect. 2 uniformed guards entered promptly. Dominic didn't resist. He didn't shout, didn't plead, didn't even attempt one last barb. When they stepped forward, he simply allowed them to guide him out, shoulders slumped, steps mechanical, like a man leaving a party he had never truly belonged to. The heavy doors sealed behind him with a definitive click, locking the silence in place. I rose slowly and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The blizzard had finally exhausted itself. The sky beyond the glass was clearing to a bruised twilight. Below, New York glittered in a vast grid of amber lights, electric ambition stretching to the horizon. I reached into my bag and withdrew the old yellowed blueprint I'd rescued from the archives months ago. The original keystone drawing of this fairy tower. Dominic had once used it as a coaster for his scotch, rings staining the delicate lines. I smoothed it carefully and placed it into a simple frame on the desk. Revenge is a consuming fire. It scorches everything, including the hand that wields it. But justice is clarity. It's the quiet rain that washes filth from stone, revealing what was always meant to endure. I hadn't destroyed Dominic out of spite. I'd merely applied the rules he himself had written. I'd excised the rot so the foundation could remain sound. Looking at the now empty chair at the head of the table, I understood something profound. I was no longer just a wife, no longer merely a historian preserving someone else's past. I had become the architect of my own future. In the end, he had erected a monument to his ego, fragile, glittering, doomed to crack under its own weight. I had built something quieter, stronger, a legacy. If you believe true power whispers rather than shouts, drop a like, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what's the one thing you've quietly built that you're most proud of? I'll be reading every single one.